de hahungota niyongets wage sklewage niwagi taloda onioda aga niwagadu hunjoda. My name is de hahungota in the Oneida language, and that means that there's two paths that I'm going through simultaneously. And to me, it's like being in our world, the traditional world, and then also understanding this world that we live in today. I walk both those paths. I'm from the Bear Clan, Wage Sklewage, and Onioda Aga, that's the people of the Standing Stone, what today we call the Oneida Nation.
Oneida History was funded in part by Irene Danielle Kress, the Evu Foundation, a charitable arm of the Capital Times, Ron and Patty Anderson, the Wisconsin History Fund, with support from the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the Friends of Wisconsin Public Television.
When you talk about who we are as people, I could talk for days, but I'm trying to wrap it up in a little bitty nutshell to kind of give you some insight, I guess, or just the understanding, as to who the Oneida people are. That would begin with our creation story and our purpose, for being here, and primarily it's just as the caretakers of the land, respecting it. And I think the key is that everything, every plant, every tree, every animal, every bug, everything that's on the Mother Earth, what we call our Mother to Earth, the animals, is that each and every one was created for a purpose, and was given a responsibility for being here by what we call Sungwaya Diesel in our language, the one who created us. And our understanding is that the human being, they were the very last things created, different colors, different sizes, different languages, and different customs, just like everything in creation. That they talk about that web of life, everything's connected. And so our creation story teaches us about respecting everything. It teaches us about responsibility that we have as the human beings, as protectors and caretakers of this natural world. It teaches us about reciprocating, of giving back, through ceremonies and thanksgiving and acknowledgments. And the key, I think the most important part of it is the relationship, that the Creator had intended for us to have this relationship, intimate relationship with all of creation, all of the human families. Over time, different teachings have come to our people. The Lodinoshoni Ha'aga, what we say in our language, is the people of the Longhouse, what contemporary people call the Iroquois. But there's a number of Iroquois nations, and each one has retained some information. The Mohawks, Oneidas, Onondagas, Cayugas, and Senecas, and later on the Tuscaroras. And what I've been doing for the last 25 years is trying to learn all of them and combining them so it gives a clearer picture of who we are. I made reference to the earth as our mother, because our understanding is that that's where everything was molded and shaped from, by this being. And so we look to her as our mother. We look to the different greater forces around us, and there's relationships there. The thunders are our grandfathers. There's a story behind that, The stars are our relatives. There's a story behind that. The sun's our elder brother. There's a story behind that. The moon's our grandmother. There's a story behind that. There's a story connected with everything, and it's all rolled up into that creation story. As time progressed and people began to multiply, different people went off into different directions. And in our oral tradition, it tells us that we originally came from the southwest area. It talks about this great river that we crossed that ran north and south. It went off into the northeast, it tells us, and that different nations arose from that. And when the nations began to identify themselves as geographically from where they lived, in our homelands in New York, we became known as the Oneida Aga, the people of the standing stone or granite. Our relatives to the east became the Ganyange Haga, what we call the people of the flint, the Mohawks. And our relatives to the west of us were known as Onundage Haga, the people of the hills. They're getting into the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains there. And then next to them was the Cayuga Haga, the people of the Mucky lands, the Cayugas. And then the Jitwana Aga, the people of the mountains, the Senecas. So every nation, which its name is derived from the territory that they resided on, for centuries, probably thousands of years. And within each, there were a number of clans too that emerged. And there's a story behind that too of how the clans came to be. It tells us that there came a time in our history that there were so many people, when people were dying, is that the people, everybody mourned, and so that began to affect the ceremonies. It disrupted the whole social society because people were grieving all the time. And there was a messenger that came here, that was sent here by the Creator to put things back into order. An idea came from this young man. We ought to pattern ourselves just as the natural world is. Because we're matrilineal, it's our eldest women who are the ones that speak for that family. And different families, these old ladies, and all of her offsprings, her sisters and her nieces and daughters and their offsprings and spouses, that's how they would live in their homes, their longhouses, matriarchally. The man would go and live with them when they marry in. Those old ladies were always in the habit of getting up early in the morning. And so what they were instructed to do was to pay special attention of that real quiet time, real sacred time at daybreak. And over time, each one of those old ladies, there was an animal that came to them. 3 from the sky world, 3 from the four-legged, and 3 from the water world. So for the Oneidas, we have 3 clans, bear, turtle, and wolf. But there's 3 different kinds from the canine family. There's 3 different kinds of, or sizes of bears from the bear. And there's 3 different types of turtles. So there's 9 distinct families that eventually became the Oneida Nation. And it's like it with all those other nations as well. Each one, there's a certain number of clans that it's composed of. And over time, there's different messages that we received. The clans came first, then the ceremonies came. And the ceremonies was our way of giving back, of showing, of honoring, things in creation. And it's cyclical. We follow the natural cycle, the universe, the seasons. And so there's ceremonies to give thanks for certain times of when we harvest things or things become ripe in the natural world. And with each one, there's a story behind it as well. The songs as well, how they came to us, whether it's medicinal, ceremonial, or what we call a social dance, just for fun, entertainment. And even in that creation story too, it talks about over time as people became sick different spirits came, different animals, and volunteered to assist, to help the people, because they have a power, they have a medicine. Just like, like today, a lot of these plants and trees and everything we look at, there's medicinal purposes that they serve. And the most important plant that the Creator gave to the people was the oyunkwa'un, what we call the native tobacco. Because again, in the creation story, it tells us that that plant originally came from the sky world, where there's another world out there somewhere. And from that world, a woman fell from there who was pregnant. And she set into motion what we have today. And that was one of the plants she brought from that world. And our instructions is that whenever we take anything from the natural world, is we can offer it, make an offering, and talk to that plant, just like I'm talking to you. Because that plant, he understands, or it understands, because it was here when those languages were created, so you know those languages. And so again, to show that respect, we just don't go out and take, and we have a ceremony, as that's what it is. Because we take that little bit of time to sit and talk to that plant and share our understanding of why that plant's here. So we use that tobacco in a very sacred way, very honorable way. We can just offer it, or we can smoke it. Our people, we've had pipes, but nothing like what they have in the plains, those kinds of pipes. They were more functional pipes, made from clay, and that's what we did. And we could do that too. We could smoke that pipe and blow that smoke and talk, because our understanding then is that that message will be carried, to whoever it is that you're talking to. And just like in everyday life, when there's hardships that we encounter as we walk that path that the Creator intended for us to walk. And so there's times that we need to ask for help or direction. We can do that too. We can burn that tobacco, and we can talk to the Creator and ask for that help, for that guidance. And in some way, if we believe, those answers will come. It can be in a dream, because there's beings that are around us day and night, they say. They're helpers, they're the Creator's helpers. And they bring back those messages from the Creator. And they can come to us through our mind. They say that they never touch the earth. The level they come to is where our shoulders are. And it's through our mind is how they communicate to us. And so it can be in that way, or it can be in a thought. They're providing that. It can be something that we need to see in the natural world. There was a time in my life where I was really struggling with my history, my past, since birth, because in our community, in indigenous communities all over this Turtle Island, what we call this continent here, is that alcoholism has really devastated our people, and that's the kind of home I grew up in. And so I was really struggling with some of those issues of growing up, that domestic abuse. And I was walking in the woods, and I came around this corner in the bend in the woods, and on this path, and here there was this grouse, a mama, and she stood on that path, and she stood her ground, and she put her feathers out, and she was running at me, and she'd stop and stop, and so I just stood there like that, and I watched her, and I looked around, and here on one side of the path there were her chicks. There's about a dozen of them, little ones. That's what she was protecting, and that helped me, because that was my mom. That's what she did. She stood in front of danger, my dad, who was the alcoholic, to protect us, but she did her best, and so that really helped. That's what I needed to see. That's what needed me to move on. I needed to see that to help me to move on and to come to some acceptance of my past, And so those things are there, if we would just take that time and stop and look and listen. Or what those Creator will do is that He'll bring people into your life. And they'll have something to say to teach you. And again, an example in my own life is that I've had a number of elders, I call elders, who are raised the old way. They know their language, they practice their ceremonies, their traditional way of life. Those are elders to me. A number of these elders have come into my life over the last 25 years and have really helped me grow, taught me about my history, the real history. And so whatever clan you belong to, each one of those families, there's what we call in the language Gudianisu. And in English we call them clan mothers. We're matriarchal. They're the ones that appoint our political leaders. They are the political leaders. But they appoint the men, what we call Ludianisu, what we call the chiefs, who do all the speaking on behalf of the family. And within each one of those families, there are also two other people who what we call faith keepers. And what that means is that they're the ones that are responsible of ensuring that the four sacred ceremonies that came to us as Iroquois people are carried on. And then each one, the man and the woman, they also have an assistant, kind of like an apprentice. Because if we, especially like I'm grandpa now, my third one is going to be born tomorrow. And you get a whole different perspective on life when you start having grandchildren, because you're doing more observing than taking care of. And our elder people, they can see that in children. They can see what their gift is. Like I was saying in the creation story, everything here the Creator put here, placed here, planted, has a purpose for being here. The same is true with the human beings. Each and every one of us too is here for a reason. That's the old belief. Not everybody is a teacher. Not everybody is a singer. Not everybody, is a leader, have those characteristics or qualities to be that. You're born with that. And so what those old people did, those elders, they would watch the children as they're growing up. And they would see which one has that ability, that natural gift, as a peacemaker, or as a singer, or as good with crafts and things like that, or who is really good with a memory and can tell those stories, from just listening to it maybe one time. The old people, they can see that in the children. And so then they're kind of groomed then, they're steered in that direction. Maybe eventually that person's going to be that clan mother. So she'll be by her side then, And even in the language, when we talk, like in English, we say a clan mother, it doesn't really give justice to what that really is, that responsibility. But in the language, Gudianisu, you can look at that word and you can take it apart. And inside of there's a part of that word that talks about a way of life, a path that you're taking, a responsibility. When you look at that journey that you're going through, life goes on infinitely. That journey that you're talking about is all those responsibilities that's tied to that, as that matriarchal leader for that family. And this is where they talk about the 7 generations. That's a part of that too. Because you're looking, that's how far ahead that you're looking on that journey that you're taking through life. You're looking ahead that many generations to the decisions that you're making at that very moment. How is that going to impact those children that have yet to be born? Is that going to benefit them, or is that going to, cause them to suffer? Now, if you think about that, when my ancestors moved here, they turned their back to all of that. Anything traditional, ceremonial. They became Episcopalians, right around 1700 there, somewheres in there. That fractionalized our nation. Consequently, when the Revolutionary War broke out, the ones that were predominantly Christian sided with the colonists. And then there was a group of our people that sided with British, and then some that tried to remain neutral. And what that war did is it really finalized that separation, because you had families fighting against one another. Our people were the scouts for that war. And what George Washington did was send in the troops to exterminate the Iroquois people. And the Oneidas were the scouts for that. So when they came here, and I think that's why, one of the big reasons why they came here, was because of that. And so made a land deal with the Menominees and wanted to re-establish themselves as a power, which never materialized. And this community here, the Oneidas of Wisconsin, have been pretty much the leaders in terms of the assimilation process. Consequently, when I was growing up here, I didn't know nothing about my history. I didn't know nothing about my culture. I didn't know my language. The English was what was spoken in my home. Alcoholism was prevalent in my home and in this community. I went to the public school. So in terms of any kind of ethnicity, other than the skin being a different color, there was nothing evident here. But in the 70s, there was a lot of indigenous people that began to kind of look at their past, to reinstill that pride in indigenous people, to look. You all have a story, you all have a creation story, you all have songs, you all have traditions, and to revitalize it, bring it back to life. It's been gasping for centuries for a lot of nations. That's when we start going to Canada. There's another community there, the Oneidas of the Thames. And they have a longhouse there, and they have ceremonies there, We still had the language here, but it was just a conversational language, nothing ceremonial in terms of traditional. But there they still had that. And there's many communities on the Canadian side that had longhouses, and just a few on the state side. And so we went there and we started attending ceremonies and started learning there. And that's where my pilgrimage began in terms of learning my history. And from that, we built the longhouse here. And in 1983, we had our very first ceremonies. And from that time on, the last 25 years, we were able to do them ourselves now in the language. And that's what we're doing today, we revitalized it. And the elders out east, they look at that as a miracle. That's a miracle. That the people from this community here are carrying on our ceremonies by people from this community, which I believe never ever occurred. Up until 1978, I think, it was illegal. It was illegal in this country for Native Americans to practice their traditional beliefs. Illegal. And so that's I guess a little bit of the history.